Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. In today's episode, we're joined by independent optometrist Shaina Zheng for a conversation that's both inspiring and refreshingly real. Shaina opens up about her journey from university to practice ownership, the lessons learned, the moments of doubt, and the growth that came with leading a team and building a business grounded in empathy and purpose. We explore what it really takes to make the leap from employee to owner, the importance of mentorship and mental resilience, and how personal experience can shape professional passion. In Shaina's case, her drive to help her patients through myopia management and dry eye care. Whether you're an aspiring practice owner, a young optometrist considering independence, or simply looking for perspective on leadership and balance, this episode is full of honest insights and encouragement to help you stay the course. So settle in, you won't want to miss this conversation. Shaina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to have you, and I'm really excited to talk about today's episode, being an independent and sort of, having a lot of success recently. I really sort of want to break that down and allow the audience to learn a little bit about your story. And as we do that, can you tell us a bit about your background? Where you studied, how you first found out about optometry?
So I was probably 8 or 9 when I went to the optometrist for the first time. My eyes were feeling uncomfortable and I felt my vision was blurred. And when I went to see the optometrist, they looked at my eyes and they actually diagnosed me with dry eyes, and said I didn't need glasses. It wasn't because I needed glasses, but did mention that I was slightly short-sighted at the time. And that was like my first experience at the optometrist at quite a young age. And then I think that was a good experience for me because I kind of knew what the profession was because it's about eyes. And I do think that's probably one of the factors of why I went down that route. I knew I always wanted to help people. Healthcare seemed like a natural fit for me. And because I was exposed to optometry at such a young age, I think that was why I picked it. And my parents were also kind of quite supportive of it as well. So that's how it ended up. And I went to the University of Melbourne. So I made that decision after I graduated from high school to spread my wings and go somewhere different. I went to Brisbane State High. So I was a Brisbane girl and I moved to Melbourne for uni. I was pretty fortunate. I got a scholarship, so it was a done deal. My parents were supportive of me and I really enjoyed my time in Melbourne. It was great. And studying at the time, it was all about we've got to learn all this stuff. There's so much stuff to learn. And we had great friends at the time because a lot of us were in a similar sort of situation. We had moved interstate to Melbourne to study optometry. And so we found a little tribe.
And then I guess after uni, what ended up happening? And I guess, what did that look like for you in those early years? And what did you learn in those early years, just sort of during uni and sort of, the first couple of years out?
I'd say in uni, we had great supervisors, great lecturers. Quite a number of them were really, really patient focused. So there was a lecturer, his name was Daryl Guest. He was a practitioner in Tasmania and he moved to Melbourne Uni and was like the director of the school at a point when I started. And he would bring up his stories and he would talk about his patients and he would talk about, their family, and he'd put them in the notes. So those little things that when we were students, we didn't really understand kind of the importance of that. And as students, we were like, we want to know your VAs, we want to know your refraction. But he made it a point to really stress the history. So that was a key learning for me, and it came directly from him, very patient focused. And then when I graduated, I went to Tasmania to practice. And funnily enough, we even saw patients of his.
Oh,
He was
wow.
no longer practicing, but they were all like, "Where's Daryl? Where's he gone?" They all remembered him, and that
Yeah.
left a lasting impression for me, because I'm like, wow, this optometrist is no longer in Tasmania and practicing, but they all still love and miss him. But
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I was mentored by an amazing optometrist at the time. His name's Ian Abraham. He's still practicing at the moment. And in my first year, I spent a lot of time with him. He kind of was also very patient focused, explained to me, how you would do things as a new optom. You're still developing your skills and you're not really thinking about that communication with the patient. And Ian was really about that communication with the patient, making sure they understood what was going on. And I think I learned a lot from him as well. And he's been a really supportive mentor, I would say, throughout my career. Still chat with him sometimes. He'll send me a message at times and say, good work, proud of you. And that's really nice. Like,
Mm.
I think I learned about myself that I really enjoy talking. I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy asking questions, talking to everyone, and trying to get feedback. And I'm really open to learning and trying new things. So that's one of the things I'd say I kind of reflect back, and I'm really like that. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really important quality, to have if you're wanting to improve and get better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's you generally find with most sort of entrepreneurs and business owners, people that take that path are generally inquisitive and they're curious and they like to talk and they like to ask questions. So I definitely can understand how that's led you on the path that you're currently on. But when you went down to Tasmania after uni, did you go into a corporate setting or was it a independent setting? Can you explain a little bit about the scenario and what did that expose you to, I guess, that first year or two out?
So we had signed up to work at a corporate practice, but in the practice, it was quite unique because there were a lot of independent optometrists that were working in there because the independent was taken over or purchased by a corporate. So it was
Okay.
I think I was really fortunate in that sense because I got to see a blend of how independent teams worked and as well as the philosophy of how we practice and how we recommend for our patients and how to solve problems for them.
Hmm. And at what point, I guess, at that stage, did you decide that, you were going to perhaps go down the path of independence and that be part of your career? Was that something that you were adamant about out of uni? I mean, obviously, you've gone into the corporate setting or what you thought was going to be the corporate setting. Then you were exposed to independence. Was it at that point you said, I think that's the path for me? What did that look like?
I must admit, at the time, I didn't really kind of understand the difference.
Mm.
I look back at it now and I speak about it, and I'm reflecting on that, the knowledge that I have now and that difference. But I must admit, after graduating, independent or corporate, to me, they were the same. I
Okay.
didn't understand the difference. I don't think it was something that was communicated to us in like our course. We knew there were independent optometrists. They seemed in the way that us students used to feel an elevated kind of position and a
Mm-hmm.
position that not many optoms could get to. So we all felt like signing on with a bigger company was more
Mm-hmm.
stable, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had a few colleagues or friends graduate and work in an independent practice, and we were all like, wow, you're amazing, like how did you get it, you're so cool, like because most of us were like, oh, that's like that, no one from the independents want to have us. And
Yeah.
that's the mindset that at the time when we were at uni, we all had. Yeah.
I would probably say that's still the same. I would
Yeah.
imagine at most. I mean, it seems to be, people that do fall into that independent space, generally it's not a strategic play, it's by coincidence.
Mm.
And then they see it and then they move forward, in that regard. And again, yeah, I mean, there is a massive difference, I would imagine, now that you look back on it and see the
Yeah.
difference. But
Yeah.
at what point then were you like, okay, and you said you and your husband, at what point did you decide to say this is free? Independence is the way for us. And once you made that decision, what did that path look like to eventually you buying a practice, which is obviously what's ended up happening?
I think for us, after practicing for a number of years, we worked with quite a lot of different teams, and we tried to learn as much as we could from everyone that we worked with. So we ask questions, we see why they did things the way they did it, mainly to learn and understand what made some teams work really well and some teams maybe not work as well as we would have liked, like in terms of conflict and ease of care in the practice. And then I think we were sitting down one day and we both knew we wanted to settle down one day and have a family. And I think that was probably the key decision maker, that we felt, if we were going to have a family, we wanted to have a practice that would kind of give us stability and something that we could work towards together and have a foundation. So I think it was really important for us to be able to make the decisions that we felt were right, because not that we couldn't work in constraints and follow what was needed or what was required, because, as an employee, that's what you do. And we were doing that for quite a long or many number of years. But we liked the idea of seeing the positives in different workplaces and being able to kind of use them and create something of our own. So it was really rooted in that, wanting that stability, having a base, and then bring up our family. And we liked the idea of the flexibility, because when we spoke to a lot of independent optometrist owners at the time when we met them, it seemed, they said, and it seemed as though they did have that flexibility. And that's something that I think we really looked for.
I mean, it's a lifestyle decision, I think it can be. And it sounds like, knowing what, you were planning in the future and mapping that out, it seemed to fit the equation quite well for you. And having that proactive and strategic approach, I think, can definitely help you. And it sounds like you had that idea early on and you've gone out in pursuit of that goal. And, you've obviously then gone and looked at different teams and assessed the situation, spoken to individuals that have walked that path, and were able to sort of, in your head and in your husband's mind, you guys were able to then say, okay, I think this is for us.
I would say, though, if it wasn't for my husband, it would never happen, because my husband is he's like the rock of the family. So very consistent, very goal-oriented, and very persistent and determined. And I think you need someone like that in a team to kind of carry you through. Having someone I don't think if I was doing it myself that I would have the confidence to kind of go down that route, for sure.
Yeah, and that's a message I hear quite a lot when I've been able to speak to a couple of, independents that have recently started their journey. One of them was Amanda Duffy, who's in the same network as yourself, and a few others that are outside. But one thing that is common throughout all is there's a partnership of some sort, whether it's husband and wife, or whether it's friend to friend, or whether it's, other family to other family. But I think the importance in independence of finding a partner, and in your case, it happened to be your husband, that maybe drove it a little bit more, or was there to sort of, guide you and be there as a team. I think that really is one of the secrets to success in independent optometry. And so the fact that you mentioned that is something that I've heard time and time again, so I can totally understand how you feel that way. But I guess when it came to that moment, that opportunity, you've obviously decided to go independent. You've done your list. You've gone out. You've been in different environments. You've found your team, or you've found what you want to create, and you mapped out the lifestyle side of things. What was that like for you to actually then get into a practice and be an owner? And what can you speak to that experience?
I think it was a definite shock. I would say like a culture shock, because as an optometrist, when you work as an employee, your focus is purely on the patient and and your consultation, and it's pretty much that's your main focus throughout your day. But what we found when we became practice owners is that wasn't the only thing that was happening, and we had to. Well, IT was one of the biggest, I would say, one of the horrors of practice ownership. So we had so many IT issues, like computers not working, server going down, problems that we've never ever encountered before. And they frustrate you because you can't put all your focus in trying to do your consultation and see your patient. And so I think the biggest culture shock, or the biggest shock, is just how many things go wrong. And I don't think we were prepared for that. Because in the background, when you work as an employee, you don't see all of that stuff in the background that's happening. And once you have your own practice, you see it everywhere, because you're the person that needs to kind of address those issues. And I think that relentless time in the beginning, there's just so many challenges, and just have to keep on pushing through, be resilient, just push through, just be consistent. But there's so many times where you kind of want to pull your hair out and you go, what have I done?
Yeah. No, totally get that. And I feel like Yeah, I see why you'd say that. It is managing a business, running a business is a little bit different to being, I guess, an employee. And the fact that you actually took one of the questions away, I was going to, what was the most shocking moment from being employed to becoming an owner? And I think you've sort of hit that nail on the head in that description. So I guess, if we're going to speak to somebody today that's, thinking about taking the step into ownership, as opposed to just working in independence or working in the corporate setting, what would you say they should prepare for? I guess as a bit of a running tip as we keep going through our conversation, what did you learn out of it? And what would your guidance be for somebody that's thinking about making that move?
I would say when we went through our studies and during uni, there was a tendency to kind of talk about like risk a lot and like, the risk and whether that's something that you would go with. And for me, my impression was that you'd have to be pretty kind of high risk to go down that practice ownership path. And for a lot of us, that wasn't really our natural kind of temperament. I don't think, for myself, I'm a bit risk averse. So having that mindset did make it a bit more challenging to want to have a practice. But I would say if you have the right networks, the right support, the right people to talk to, a good kind of sounding board, I was fortunate. I had my husband, well, at the time, not husband. Oh, actually, when we bought the practice, we were husband and wife. So
wow, so it all happened in a pretty quick timing. You threw all the big life milestones in nice and quickly.
But like to have that one person in your corner, I think you definitely
Yeah.
need it because there are so many things that challenge you and you have to be open to the challenge and you have to try to push through and overcome the challenge and embrace the challenge and try to see it more as I'm going to learn from this as opposed to, oh man, this is another thing that's come up. And it's really challenging to do. But if you've got that support person, that person to go, look, we can get through this, it really makes a big difference. And I think with the focus on mental health for young people nowadays, or for everyone, mental health is a big conversation that we have. That's also one of the things that we need to acknowledge, that when you go into practice ownership, if you don't have that mindset of resilience of, I'm going to push through this, I'm going to get back up, I'm going to try again,
Yeah.
it's devastating for your mental health. And the other thing I'd say is have strategies in place to help you outside of work to kind of get into that place where you're feeling like you can contribute the best. So that's things like self-care. I really believe in that, doing things that you really enjoy just to fill your cup so you're able to, give your best when you're in practice, when you're with your team, when you're with your patients. Because when you're a practice owner, there's a lot more responsibility and you are a leader and you must take that responsibility and you have to be there and other people's rocks when they have an issue or a challenge, you're there to kind of guide and help, and that's a big part of your responsibility as a practice owner. Well, I think anyway it should be.
Yeah. No, and there's a lot of things to think about there, and obviously you've walked that path, so you understand that. So, and you did mention having a network and speaking up, and I'll definitely touch on that a little bit further on in the chat because I think that is a critical thing over and above obviously the partner that you have at the time in the business, that broader, I guess, experience. Because success leaves clues, and people have generally done it before, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's about finding people that have and sort of leveraging their knowledge, which I think this industry is really dependent on, and we should be building that up more and more. Something you touched on earlier on was when you went down to Tasmania and you had your uni lecturer, his practice, or he was working in that environment. They remembered him. Obviously, that probably goes back to the trust that he'd been able to build with the patient. And obviously, we do talk about the business side, but if we sort of swing it back to, I guess, the patient experience and building that trust with the patient. How did you go about earning the trust with patients when you first took over a practice? Because you had acquired an established practice, you had to go in and you had to basically introduce yourself and be part of that. How did you manage that, knowing that there was already, I guess, history with the patient in that stall?
I would say with our practice, we had a retiring optometrist and he was a great optometrist. The patients loved him. He'd built that same trust with his patients and we really admired that. And it definitely was a challenge when we came in because they're big shoes to fill. Some of the things, we spent hours looking at patient record cards the day before they came in. So we were on top of everything. So we knew, if they had an issue, if they've seen or had surgery, we were on top of that We were prepared. That's all we could do. We just had to prepare for every single patient. And then when they came in, we had to be like, oh, I know this has happened. I know this has happened. And a lot of that was us studying the notes and trying to understand everything we could before the patient came in. And that was an investment we made, I think, at least for the first 2, potentially 3 years, going through that process, spending hours and hours the day before going into practice and studying those things. So we would be ready when they were talking to us, be ready and understand what their eye health has been like for the past, some of them 20 years. And it's a testament to how amazing the optometrists that worked there previously. Yeah, we were really inspired by that, because we were like, oh, he's really done a great job. And then we were like, how can we continue on that and make patients comfortable and also put our own spin on it, but do a good job as well. Like that's ultimately what we found. Preparation, it was all we could do. And then it was up to them whether they liked us or not.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I guess, like looking at that as an option, and for people that are listening that are perhaps considering stepping into an existing practice, again, what kind of advice would you give to someone like that where, the owner is about to retire and they're looking at transitioning into that business? If you were to go back and speak to yourself at that point in time and give yourself advice, would there be anything that you would do that was different to what you perhaps did? And how would that advice sound?
I don't think we would have done anything different. But what I think if I could give the advice to us when we were like younger, I would say probably not be so hard on ourselves. It's not personal. Like, we did our best. We spent all those hours and sometimes the patient connection just wasn't there, or it just wasn't the right fit for them, and not to be too disheartened, because there were, quite a number of times where we felt like, we weren't doing the right thing, even though we'd prepared and we were like, oh, what is it that we're doing wrong? But it was just a difference in potentially like different practitioner. So now potentially that they could go somewhere a bit closer because it was a bit more inconvenient for them. There were other factors. It wasn't necessarily personal, and it was a potentially a decision for them to make now that there was a new change and new ownership. And I think I would say to our younger selves, don't be so hard on yourself, because at the time it was hard, because when we'd tell our parents like the struggles we were going through, and they would be supportive. But I think at the time, every patient that you don't feel like you've built that connection with, it does impact you, and it makes you feel like, oh, like, am I not doing a good job? But I think it's just the nature of change. So it's just the nature of change.
Yeah, I think that particular point, it's probably one of those lessons that you do have to go through to learn it, unfortunately. But to be able to disconnect the person with the business and the business with the person. And it goes back to, what fewer things that you were saying with mental health and everything as well. So often the mental health of the business is the mental health of the person. And it's very hard to split the two. So if the business is going well, you're going well. If the business is not going well, you're generally not going well. And so how do you create that separation? And I guess if you can do that and identify, it is two separate things, and can stay true to that, it will help a lot. So I think that's a great point. When it comes to building connections with the community, how does that differ from your experience, say, being more independent focused as opposed to being, a corporate, or being independent focused as opposed to, say, maybe the corporate approach that is had in an environment, in the community? Do you notice the difference? Have you spotted the difference? Is there things that you think you do differently to what a corporate would do?
I would say, like, in independent optometry, one of the benefits is that the practitioner that's in the practice is usually there long term. And, if you're there long term, you will build that lasting relationship with the patients that come see you, that do want to see you and do kind of trust you. And that translates to when we go to the shopping center and Jackson goes, oh, hey, hi, Mr. Smith. Or like, oh, yeah, this is my son, this is my daughter. Those kind of conversations. And I'd say Jackson has a great way of remembering people's names and remembering their faces. He's got great memory. Wow. So, when he walks down the street, if he sees someone, he'll be like, hello, and usually knows their name, and usually like, how's whatever going. And I think that comes with being in a practice for a period of time. So I don't necessarily think that independents and corporates kind of different in that aspect, because you can have an optometrist that is in a corporate setting and has been there for a long time. And I have seen the same kind of interactions and the way that they deal with their patients. So I do think probably the key difference is they're probably less likely to say hello when outside of work, because they want to keep that professional kind of relationship. Whereas with the independent, like you probably are happy to go hello. It's a different kind of, I guess, feel. But I would say independents, corporates, like if there's a practitioner that's there for a period of time, there is that loyalty that gets built up. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
No, it definitely does. And I do want to tie that into another section we were speaking about, where we're talking about, I guess, the staff and what that enables you to do for your staff. Because obviously you can create the environment over and above, if you're in a corporate setting, generally it's not the owner, generally, or there's a bit more happening there where there's direction from a head office and it's got to be done in a certain way. Whereas in your obviously scenario, you're able to really create that team. And it's something that I've realized is important to you, team and culture. And we've spoken about it a few times. And so, we'll circle back to that with the context of the team. But if we go back to a point that we spoke about earlier with regards to the connection and connecting, and I guess as an optom, and as an owner too, it can be quite isolating. And we spoke about the importance of mental health and how important it is to connect with people. How important has it been for you, and how do you approach that concept of networking or connecting and sharing ideas? And I guess, what tips would you have to create those connections, for people that are listening?
So I love creating connections. I really love talking to people and learning about what they do. I think that just comes naturally for me, and I understand that not everyone would be as comfortable to kind of approach someone and ask questions, but I always come from a place of like curiosity. And what I've found is in the optometry industry, people are very generous with their time. They're very happy to help. I really felt that way in regards to with our practice. When Jackson's gone out to kind of chat with some optoms, I've gone out to chat with some optoms about some of the specific services that we do. And we've found that everyone's very collaborative, polite, and very happy to listen and share. So I think we're really fortunate to be in an industry like that. I haven't had too much pushback or too much negativity in kind of, meeting people, chatting to people, asking questions. I know it's not like that in a lot of other industries, and I've heard that it can be quite cutthroat. So when I talk to some of my friends in different industries, they find it quite interesting how collaborative we are.
Yeah.
But, I could just be lucky. I could have just had a lot of very, very lovely people that have just crossed my path.
And I guess tips for that. I mean, I guess trade shows, events, what kind of context do you find the best networks happen and your best connections? How are they occurring, and how can we advise people to, get out there and connect if that's something that they're after?
I'll definitely say in person. So I feel like if I've met someone and we have a chat, it's much more powerful than, not to say that, sending an email or sending a message is not powerful, because those are opportunities to meet someone in person and have those chats.
Yep.
But I think for me and my way of doing things, it's just to go meet people, participate, contribute. And then what you find is you do find people that align, and they might come up and talk to you. I used to be very shy, so I'd only talk to people kind of one-on-one, and, I might be at work and there's an optom there and they don't have a patient. So I'll just like walk in and I'll just like have a little chat. That'd be me just sitting there, the annoying young optometrist with all the questions.
Yep.
I don't know what they thought, but they did always, were very happy to share with me. So maybe I wasn't that annoying.
No, that's right. It's never generally as bad as you make it out in your mind. That's for sure. But so you touch on those face-to-face events or those opportunities. Invariably, and correct me if I'm wrong from your point of view, the trade shows or the OA events, for example, where you're getting CPD points or CPD events, is generally where the majority of optoms and optometrists do their networking. Again, there are probably some other things that occur from time to time. But, I guess there is a trend now for a lot of these points to be done online, for example. And so it takes you away from the actual attendance of the event itself. Is that something that you are actively thinking about with regards to your involvement in what you do? Like, do you seek out those events for networking opportunities, or are you more, inclined to sort of go, well, I'll just do the online points and get them, in that point of view. And I guess, do you attribute those two as one and the same from the point of view of getting points and networking, or do you look at them as two totally different things and I guess address them in those ways as well?
Personally, for me, networking events they feel a little bit like intense for me because there's a whole bunch
Right.
of people and it's hard to create that connection, especially if in that event people are grouped in with their own kind of,
Circle.
people that come. It's still possible, but I think you'd have to be very extroverted to be able to break into that circle.
Right.
And I think a lot of optometrists may find it challenging, like myself, in those circumstances. I much prefer things like workshops, things like anything where it's in person. So sometimes we might have a very small type of like meeting.
Mm.
I personally like those much better. I think you can make a better connection, and I think people are more comfortable. And I think that's at the end of the day, you got to be comfortable to be able to share. And if
Yeah.
you're not comfortable, you won't share.
Yeah, and I guess there are a lot of industry bodies that exist now that, if I guess, facilitate that. So whether it's your Provisions, your eye care pluses, and all the other respective Vision Connection, there are a couple of eye benefits. There's a couple of those groups and those where you've got like-minded people that you can share ideas and thoughts. And so I think, I totally get what you're saying with that. And you also perhaps have less of an influence with supplier that's around. So obviously, a lot of these events, there are suppliers around trying to get your attention as well. So that makes total sense. It being something strategic and something that's done on a more low-key scale, I think, will create more of that meaningful connection that will actually help you improve individually. If we shift to some of the lessons that you've learned from a leadership capacity, and you mentioned once you do acquire a store, you do in some ways become a leader, and you've got to be that rock, and you've got to be the person that motivates, inspires, sets the culture up for your team. In our pre-interview, you mentioned something as an aha moment for yourself. And it was when you saw, I guess, a manager take time to spend with a particular staff member, rather than place them, they've spent time with them. How did that experience shape your approach to leadership? And can you speak to that a little bit more?
So I was really fortunate to have or witness an incredible manager. I'm like, should I say his name? I always say his name. I might embarrass him.
Okay, that's up to you.
During my work in my early years. And what he showed me is like you can be compassionate and really try to understand what's going on as opposed to jumping to conclusions and trying to kind of fix something without actually going through the process of, chatting and working out what's going wrong. I think what he showed me is that you can solve problems sometimes by just being encouraging and supportive and pointing out where the improvement lies. I think he had such great emotional intelligence. I didn't understand it at the time. So I reflect back now and I go, wow, that was amazing. But at the time, I remember telling him, like, I don't understand how you do this. And I was like, how do you do this? And I really just didn't understand how his mindset was. And he was like, oh, it might have been natural. It could have had training or been through leadership courses. But that's just something that I reflect back now and I go, wow, he's the type of leader I want to be like. Because I wouldn't call him a manager, even though he was a manager. He was really invested in all of us, making sure that things were set in place so that we could all do the best that we could do as a team.
Yeah.
And that was quite a different approach to some of the other people I've worked with. So I really admired that. I would say, if we go back to us when we first took over the practice, that was not me. I had no idea, I had no idea what I was doing. I'll just say the truth, because at that time you just snowed under with so many things that you just don't have the time to think about that, to think about those things, like how we're dealing with the people at work. I was so focused on the patients that I must admit I didn't realize and I wasn't focusing on the people in the team as much. Not that I didn't focus on it, but it wasn't what I would say like the priority. And it wasn't until, I'm a work in progress still, but it wasn't until I kind of went through and we have an amazing team member who's been with us for 6 years. So she's seen me from the beginning, us from the beginning and to now, and that change. I hope to think that she's seen the change in how we do things and how we try to have that team and that collaborative environment. And we made the shift about a year and a half ago to not just only focus on the patients, which is what we always did. So, give the patient the best experience, most innovative solution for their issues or their eye problems. We also added let's try to make this workplace the best workplace we've worked at, so that everyone in the team can feel kind of included, and that was the dual proposition, as opposed to just the one thing. And I feel like now that I've put my efforts in both, it's much better and more. It's a sustainable kind of loop. I see it that way. Yeah.
And I appreciate your openness to admit things like that, because I guess seeing it now compared to what it was when you started, and being able to talk to that is really influential, I believe, to people that are listening, because it shows that there's always room for improvement. We are all work in progress, and there are elements of us getting better. And I feel like as an optometrist and as an optometrist owner, going into uni and starting out on this path, it wasn't business ownership, and maybe it was, but more often than not, it isn't business ownership that you're aspiring for. You are looking at being in the medical profession, and you want to help people, and you're focusing on that clinical component. And so you're really, spending those formative years in that mindset. And then obviously in your instance, you've taken over the business, and now the business acumen has had to start to increase. And you've been able to, I guess, take that on. A word that you used, or a term that you used, that I want to speak to you about, was emotional intelligence. Now, it's not a word that a lot of people say often, but when they do say it, it'll pick up on my radar, because I think it's a pretty critical component in leadership. What does emotional intelligence mean to you, and how have you translated that into your practice, I guess, as simply put, and what are the benefits that you've seen with it in mind, I guess, having exercised it in some capacity?
I'm not the expert in emotional intelligence, but how I see it is that if there is a problem or something that comes up that I've noticed, I'm going to give the person the benefit of doubt. I'm going to ask questions, going to approach it with curiosity, try to approach it from a place of non-judgment, and just try to get this full story. And then look at it and see what we can do to try to improve whatever it is that has come up. I think a lot of the time for me, it's about listening to other people's voices, their opinions, being open to listening to those things, and trying to take that time to pause before I respond. And those little things, for me, I would say I'm quite an empathetic person. So when patients,
that's the word I was looking for. Spot on.
Patients or anyone in the team, I'm sensing some kind of sensing some type of conflict, I'm always mindful of that and trying to, maybe potentially wait until later to address it, but ensure that they're acknowledged and they know that we're appreciative of what they're doing. And at that moment, it just might be a bit of a hiccup, and we can always come back and chat about it later. But it's not easy. Sometimes, everyone gets frustrated. We're all human, but it's just trying to make that space, that space between what's happening and our emotions.
Exactly. And I think that the word empathy is where when I hear or see sort of emotional intelligence at play, it's how empathetic can you be in a situation to understand why it's occurred, and then how are you going to use that to basically navigate the ship to get the outcome that you desire to get, for the benefit of the practice and the benefits of the individuals involved. And as a leader, that's obviously, your vision and your direction, in the environment that you create, which is your store. So, I think it's a really powerful thing. And I think it comes down to some simplistic ideas, but a lot harder to execute, especially when there is a business at play with regards to results and reputation, and then also the emotions of individuals and how do you manage that. And it's definitely one of the harder challenges in business that people are not telling you about when you get started. So I guess if you look at it now, and we can see a few of them, but what are some of the guiding principles that you put in place when you are developing your own team? What are some of those now, looking back on what you're creating, what you've created, and what you want to create going forward?
I think with the team, I honestly see, personally for me, after witnessing that compassion that my previous manager had shown for his team, I try to act in that same way. So I would never give up on anyone in the team, even if, things aren't going right. I'd always see that there's a way for improvement, and I will do my best, however I can, to ensure that I support people when they need help or if things aren't going right. I guess I'm pretty loyal in that sense, that if, and I find interesting because I've spoken to some people and they don't necessarily agree with my approach.
Mm-hmm.
But either I've been very lucky to have such an amazing team. The people that we work with, they're all so talented. They know what they're doing. They bring their whole self. I'll always believe that they do when they come in to help the patients and help each other. So I like to continue believing that because that's how I feel. And then just hope that, that I could say like positive energy creates something that's amazing for people that come in to see us. So that's, can't explain it, but that's kind of my philosophy.
No, I think that's pretty well put. And I think, ultimately it's that energy, that intention, there's an underlying motive there that you've got that you're creating. And that's almost like that resilience component too. So if you don't see it, you work on it, and you'll get there. Another word you mentioned earlier on was finding your tribe and, having a tribe. And I feel like people then are attracted to the qualities that you are putting out. And so you invariably attract people. And once you recognize that, you can be strategic about that too. And you realize, it's like you're not for every patient, you're not for every person, but the people that you do connect with and that do resonate with your thoughts and with your ways of being will come closer to you and you create a stronger team. And I think if you're mindful of that, that in turn gets created. It doesn't happen as a fluke, put it that way, and so you're being strategic in that. And it sounds like that's happened from the beginning for you. It's just at any given moment as your growth has developed, you've been able to then sort of learn the lesson and move forward, and continue to do so. All right, so if I want to change gears a little bit, and I love the talks on leadership, on ownership, and how you're managing that in your team and the philosophies and principles behind it. But if we sort of go back to the business side of things and the tangible sort of side of the business, what I've noticed with your practice going forward in the past, and what you're doing now, is really focusing on some niches. And as an independent, I feel like niches are a really critical component to having a successful practice. From what I've identified, you've got myopia management and dry eye specifically as niches, as well as any others. At what point did you decide to go down that path? And I guess how have you picked those areas in particular?
So I would say it's personal to me. So diagnosed with dry eyes as a child, diagnosed with myopia as a child, look back with all the knowledge that I have now and go, I would have been really suitable for orthokeratology. Instead of using those eye drops, we could have had some discussions about my meibomian gland dysfunction, all those things that I look back at and I go, oh man. And I'm really mindful for my children. So like, that's not going to happen to them. Like they're all in myopic control. They're all doing their good eye health habits, helping to protect their eyes from developing dry eyes. We know it's a growing condition. So many people are on digital devices. Young people are having issues with it. It's pretty much unheard of previously, and now it's heard of. So for me, it's definitely a personal thing, knowing that I've gone through it, helping other people, even like I said, my own kids not go through that. Hopefully, I do everything I can, but sometimes you're fighting the external environment, which is very difficult to win.
Yeah.
So I think that comes from a personal, like the why we do those things. And I think in terms of how we do it, we try to take that approach of, letting people know what's going on, explaining things so they understand. Because one of the things that I think is it's not enough to tell people they have an issue. You've got to explain it. Otherwise, the likelihood of it, adherence or following the plan, it will be low, and then there will be no positive benefit for the patient.
That knowledge piece of letting them know, do you do that in your marketing? Do you do that in your consultation? Is it done in the pre-testing? Is there a strategy to that, or how have you mapped that out?
It's done in the consultation. So all the optometrists that work in our practice, 3 of us, including myself, we have a very strong focus, and it's our ethos to explain things, even if it takes a long time, because we need people to understand why they're doing something so they can do it and have benefit to doing it. Because there's so much, everyone knows that we shouldn't smoke. That just being told that you shouldn't smoke doesn't mean that you stop smoking. So there's so many factors at play with adherence and compliance, and we really need to make people understand the why. And if it resonates with them, then they'll see benefit in doing it. Yeah.
I guess in your instance, you're fortunate because your why is so personal that it becomes a benefit to the business as well. So you're ticking off, 2 items there in one go, which is awesome. When it comes to specialisation and creating a niche, as a bit of a growth strategy. What advice would you give to independents, I guess, who want to establish a niche, and at what point do they start doing it, from your experience? What part of the journey?
I think like ours grew naturally from I guess that you need the passion. You really need to be passionate at what you're doing, because sometimes a lot of the investments that we made didn't make financial sense. A lot of, but we did it anyway because we're like, well, we need to do something for, people like, or for myself as well, like, and just trust that you're addressing something that's important, and that when people come to see you, and if you've explained things well, that you hope that that's important to them as well. I guess a lot of what we've done is based on, like I said, how I feel. Like if I were to go to an optometrist, I would want to have all the options there, so I'd be able to make the best decision and give an outcome that I would expect. So it's difficult because it's so personal to me, but I guess if it's not so personal for like someone else, you've got to have another motivation. So maybe like your mum has the issue, or your brother has the issue. For me personally, I think that's the greatest kind of trigger for you to really want to do something, have that passion, have that drive to really make a difference. And that's why it's easy for me, because that's where it's all grounded on. But I can see that if you don't have that story, or that you don't have that connection, it can be harder to justify, because then you'll be looking purely at the business analysis. And that's, and then that's a different outcome, to what you would expect.
I think that's a great tip. I mean, and I think it's a tip that would not be discussed. A lot of times you'll hear someone say something like, "Oh, just make it a passion." Let's see the good that you're helping somebody, and take joy out of that, as you should, and people do. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you can, do what you're saying, which is effectively look into your ecosystem, find out, what conditions have been around, your family. I mean, and even yourself. And so often when I speak to people how they got into the industry, they say, "I went to the optom when I was a kid," or "I have an eye condition myself, and so that led me down." It's a very high percentage with regards to why people become optometrists. So when you actually make it a point to say, well, see what, is there any condition, your mum has, your dad has, or, your extended family have, and how can you help them? And if you keep them in mind when you're doing what you do, then it might show you the light, I guess, with these particular niches, and being of assistance to them and obviously to the broader community. So I think it's a really good point. And it's a point that we don't probably speak about enough. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so as we start to wrap up, and I guess maybe some tips for the next generation and for the current generation, if they're open to listening to it, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as an independent to date, as an owner going forward, and how have you overcome that?
I think the biggest challenge is, as optometrists, where we're positioned in kind of the perception in the community. So I think a lot of people see optometrists as a place to get their glasses. They don't realize the amount of clinical training that we have, and that we're actually kind of, I term this as we are sort of like the GP for the eye. So
100%.
And I use that analogy when I talk to my friends who aren't in optometry, because I assume everyone knows that. But when I have a special story. So I had a friend, she had a sore red eye and had been going on for a while, and her vision was a little bit blurry, and she went to a GP, and her GP gave her classic eye drops, and then kind of she left, and then she went back because it didn't get better, and then she left and went back, and then she went to a different GP, and she said she went to 5 different GPs, and at the 5th time she begged the GP to refer her to an eye specialist because she knew something was wrong.
Right.
And so they referred her to the eye specialist, and she actually had uveitis, so a condition that, is not treatable with antibiotics. And then after getting that diagnosis, she found out that if she hadn't got it addressed, she could have gone blind in that eye. And but luckily she, with effort on her behalf, got that referral to see the specialist. And then I explained to her that, she could have come and seen an optometrist, because optometrists have the tools and are able to diagnose uveitis without having to need to see the specialist at all. And she didn't realize that that's what we do. And after I told her, she's like, "Oh, I'll know for next time, and I'll make sure that, I'll go there first. And then if need be, I could get referred to the ophthalmologist if it required it." So that's just like the community is not 100% sure what we do. And that's a challenge, because if they're not sure what we do, how can they see value in what we do?
Yeah. That's such a massive point. I've got about a million questions to go on that or not. So because I you know, and I'm mindful of timing, but I think there's a really, really strong undertone there behind what could be done for independence, because I totally agree with you. And when you say, you know, the GP of eyes, I think that's an awesome message. And if I just touch on that quickly, I feel like in our industry, there is a little bit of confusion with whether we're a retail operation or whether we're a clinical operation. And depending on what optometry store you walk into, you are going to get a retail operation or you're going to get a clinical. Now, some do both, obviously, but what are they more dominated in? And I feel like that's maybe where the confusion comes in, because if you see a particular company's advertising, you know, and I don't need to say much more than that, it's all focused on the product and the price. And when it's just the product and the price and not the solution you're fixing or helping to assist, the messaging to the community in general can become confusing, I guess. So, and on that note, it's like, well, how do I know what they do, and also where do I go? Because it sounds like obviously you're very clinically astute and you understand what's happening, but perhaps not everyone is, because their work environment perhaps won't allow that, or if they do, they're limited to what they can do, and that in turn for the consumer makes them brand everyone the same. It's like, well, if I went to one, why aren't they all the same? So I think you speak to something really powerful there that is important, but I think challenging that for the next generation and for the younger optometrists and for the people that are coming forward, I think is a really, really important point. So I think that's a great point again. If you could start over again, what would you do differently, if anything? You can say, no, I did it perfectly.
No, I don't want anyone to think that I did things perfectly, because really, I don't think, like, it's not a perfect road. I think you will make mistakes. That's normal, and you just have to accept that you'll make mistakes. You know, when you make your first mistake, and you know, I make mistakes all the time, but the key is I try to learn from them, and I try my best to make the mistake right if I can, and then just move forward. So I think if you're wanting to go on a journey like this, you have to understand that you can't do everything perfectly. You won't do everything perfectly, but that's okay. Like, as long as you've got that, I think, growth mindset, that drive for continuous learning and improvement, I think, you know, if you just work at it, you'll get to where you need to be. So, yeah.
No, I love it. And would you do anything differently in reflection now? Like, is there something that, you know, you would go back and, I know there's a lot of mindset stuff, I feel, that we've spoken about, but like, you know, would you have spent a bit more time in corporate? Would you have decided to buy something sooner? Was there anything like that as a tangible action that you might have done differently, or maybe done a different course at a certain point to get you better equipped?
There's one thing, because you asked, that I think if I could go back, I would do differently. And one of the things, not so much do differently, but do sooner. So we branched into like the dry eye space and the myopia space a bit later than what we originally wanted to or planned to, purely because at the time when we had discussions within our team about doing it, we had a pushback from being told that it was alternate therapy or therapy that's not suitable, not something we as optometrists should do. And I think that pushback really kind of faltered my confidence in wanting to kind of embrace innovations and going down that route. And I guess at the time I didn't question it because, you know, how could you question someone who's more experienced and you know, a bit more superior than, like, you know, senior than you?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I would probably change, to have that confidence to really go with what I felt was something that I wanted to do, or like the direction. But I understand it can be a challenge because in your team, you want everyone in your team to align. And at that time, there just wasn't alignment. But
it obviously laid the foundation for it becoming something in the future, I guess. And so
it was interesting because it took about like another 3 or 4 years before I even considered the idea again.
Wow.
It really impacted on my confidence in doing something like that. And I think that speaks to surrounding yourself around people that are encouraging and supportive.
For sure.
Because there are a lot of like naysayers, and you can take them personally. And I think I might have taken it a bit too much to heart at the time, and waited so long before we kind of decided to go down that route again. So
no, that's a great tip. And I think, that comes into the support around you outside of the store potentially, and getting that confidence from other people. But I think that's a really great one. If you could leave an aspiring optometrist who wants to go into ownership with one piece of advice, you know, based on your journey, I guess simply put, what would that be?
I think you can do it. Yeah. You'll get it. You'll definitely do it, and I honestly think if you put that persistence, that determination into something that you really believe in, then you'll do it. It won't happen straight away. It won't be easy, but you'll do it.
If you're harboring that, definitely it can be done. And I think the trick is to go out there and reach out to people that have done it before, people like yourself. And I guess on that note, if there is somebody that's listened to this and they're curious to learn more about your story, or maybe to get some tips or some advice from you with regards to, what to do when it comes to the things that we've discussed, what's the best way that they can reach out and get in touch with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you are more than welcome to message me there.
Cool. All right. And we'll put your link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So if anyone is interested in getting in touch, please feel free to check out the show notes and click on through and speak to Shaina in that regard. But otherwise, Shaina, I really appreciate your time. I love the conversation today. It's definitely up my alley with regards to all the things we discussed with regards to leadership and ownership and mentality and obviously, niching and, independent optometry. So it was really insightful, and I think the audience will get a lot out of it. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really happy to be able to share. Like, I don't see myself as an expert, so I'm just kind of sharing my story, and that's the kind of environment I feel most comfortable in. So thanks for that.
No problems at all.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.